5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to honor an American patriot, a great and good man, and a hero of mine, Brent Scowcroft, who passed away recently. From humble roots, Brent rose to become an Air Force general, the national security advisor to 2 presidents, and a statesman whose counsel was sought by policymakers of all political stripes. After his passing, Brent's family and friends held a ceremony to celebrate his life. And they described Brent as an exceptional public servant who left an indelible stamp on U.S. foreign policy and on the National Security Council as an institution. Brent's contributions as a national security advisor may be his primary legacy, but what I find most striking about the tributes to Brent are not what they say about him as a professional, but what they say about him as a person. As Stephen Hadley put it, there are few people in Washington who are as respected and revered as Brent Scowcroft. It was not just because of what he did, it was because of who he was, a true gentleman, much loved by all who had the privilege of working with him. Bob Gates noted that Brent was tough as nails on matters he cared about, but also the most kind, decent, and humble person I have ever known. These words resonate with me because I was one of the many people who had the honor to call Brent a role model and a friend. Brent served as a mentor to multiple generations of men and women who valued his wisdom and sought to emulate his example. I met him between my sophomore and junior year of college when I interned at the Scowcroft Group, a firm Brent founded after leaving government. And I believe I was assigned to write a piece on the prospect of Russia selling missiles to Cyprus. And I remember gingerly asking Brent for guidance in the way a young nobody approaches a distinguished somebody, expecting to be brushed off. And he couldn't have been kinder, patiently walking me through the intricacies of the issue, telling me stories about his experience negotiating with the Soviets, and making me feel at ease. It was these small acts of grace, repeated so many times for so many people when nobody else was watching, that made Brent so special. Our first meeting was the start of a lifelong friendship that I cherished. Brent took more joy in the success of others than in his own success, and he genuinely cared about me, my family, and my career. And I know how happy he was when his former intern became the first Vietnamese American woman ever elected to Congress. And it really made me proud to make him proud. In fact, it was Brent Scowcroft who is partially responsible for my decision to enter public service. As luck would have it, Brent gave the commencement speech at my college graduation. His message was about the importance of a strong but humble American leadership around the world. And it was also about the value of public service, especially government service. Brent's words stirred something in me. I was a refugee from Vietnam whose family's lives had been saved by the U.S. Navy. And Brent's speech made me realize that public service might be the best way for me to chisel away at the debt of gratitude I owed this country. And I recalled that speech after 9/11 when I left my private sector job, went to grad school, and on to work at the Department of Defense. I also recalled that speech a decade later when I made what some might call a foolhardy decision to run for Congress. And after Brent's passing, I tracked down that speech. It wasn't easy because Brent often wrote things by himself and then tended to throw them away, which is consistent with his unpretentious character. And reading it again made me emotional, and it made me miss Brent. And it still inspires me all these years later. And in the speech, Brent asked me and my young classmates, our futures before us, to reflect on what we would like our epitaph to say after we drew our last breath. And then he offered this gentle advice, quote, "I would hope that many of you would consider turning to public service. There is something enormously fulfilling about being engaged in something bigger than you yourself. It imparts a satisfying sense of purpose, which in my experience is not attained in any other way. And there is a desperate need in this country for good people to man our government structures. And I know it's getting more and more difficult to be a public servant. We have driven many of our best people away. But I ask you to consider public service not because it's easy, but because it is hard, rewarding, and oh so necessary. How well the wonderful things this great nation stands for will be preserved and projected will depend on the quality of people whose hands are on the helm of state." This nation was blessed to have Brent's steady hands on the helm of state. Ginny Mulberger, one of Brent's closest friends and colleagues, said the word that best described Brent was devotion. He was devoted to his country, his family, and his friends. His legacy will be carried forward by men and women he taught, mentored, and inspired to pursue public service. What better epitaph could there be? Rest in peace, General. Thank you, and I yield back.